And now, The Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the Books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Welcome to the Edwin Black Show. I'm Edwin Black, investigative journalist and historian, and author of IBM and the Holocaust War Against the Weak, The Farhud, and many other books. If you like what this show is doing, tell a friend. Subscribe for passwords at theedwinblackshow.com. We're happy to have solidarity from many national organizations, such as JNS, American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, EMET, Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, Stand With Us, COA Michigan, the Israeli American Council, the Israel Group, and many others. We welcome guests I see from, across the United States, from Australia, Great Britain, I see Germany, Canada, Mexico, Israel, and elsewhere, plus our three watch parties in the Villages, Newton, and Chicago. If you have a question limited to today's topics, place one sentence, repeat one sentence in Zoom's QA feature. No comments or opinions, please, because then we can't see the question. The Edwin Black Show is growing globally. We speak frankly without partisanship to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present, very, very tense, and a future still uncertain. Now to today's episode of history, injected, infected, and resurrected with the same Jew hatred century after century, slogan after slogan, shirt color after shirt color. The headline of this episode of the Edwin Black Show is Gaza, Jerusalem, Israel explosion, what's next? That's quite misleading because everything is next. Not just in Gaza and Jerusalem, but in Syria, Lebanon, Iran, in our own country, just down the street, and indeed worldwide. We are standing in the center of tumultuous multi-channel wind tunnels, and the only way out is through a mighty firestorm. We're on the cusp of learning whether we are running from our history or running back to our history. Okay, let's go. Here's the update. As of 3 p.m. today, the war was with Gaza and Hamas. For the moment, all quiet on the southwestern front. It could change any minute. Egyptian mediators, led by Egyptian intelligence chief Abbas Kamal, have been shuttling back and forth between Gaza and Tel Aviv to solidify the very temporary ceasefire now holding. Hamas wants 1,100 prisoners released in exchange for the bodies of several Israelis. Plus, they have demands about Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, that is, the Jewish property in East Jerusalem, stolen by Jordan and now under eviction orders because the squatters have refused to pay the previously agreed rent. Plus, Hamas wants the Israeli and Egyptian blockade that intercepts weapons to cease. That will not happen. In the meantime, Israeli security forces have arrested several Hamas operatives on the West Bank who were trying to orchestrate civilian violence. Every few hours, as part of the negotiation, Hamas threatens to reignite the war, and Israel answers that it is ready to respond with even more ferocity than last month. The upheaval that probably ousted Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu yesterday, if successful, will not change the security situation. On the contrary, knowing Naftali Bennett as I do, it may have intensified Israel's willingness to use decisive military and strategic action against Hamas. Israel has already fast-tracked a revolutionary new weapon system being temporarily called the missile blanket, an AI-controlled series of ground and drone-borne sensors that detect a rocket launch or even a straight line anti-tank missile the moment it is fired. Once detected, the system triggers close-in interception within 10 to 15 seconds using inexpensive, super-fast rockets. So if Hamas launchers fire 70 rockets in 20 seconds, the blanket will kill 80 to 90% of the launch and the launch crews as well, leaving the Iron Dome to finish the job. Major General Aharon Haliva, commander of the IDF's operations branch, confirms the plan has been in the works for some time, once again to reduce Hamas's threat and the danger to civilians. The missile blanket will take about 2 years to become operational and is undoubtedly part of the billion-dollar missile funding Israel is now seeking in Washington. At the same time, high-energy laser and mixed-altitude defense readiness is being sharpened, even as we speak. Who won this skirmish? Israel won the battle, and with amazingly inadvertent loss of life, while Hamas targeted whole cities and towns with 4,000 unguided missiles. They tried to kill thousands. Israel stopped them. True. But Hamas did succeed in destroying one thing: the political fiction of the Palestinian Authority, which we know represents no one other than its own stooge bank accounts. The Arab street in the area have now identified with Hamas and reject the comical Palestinian Authority so fiercely that a violent pro-Hamas riot broke out to stop the PA-appointed Mufti from praying at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which sits atop Judaism's most sacred place, the HaKodesh, HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant containing the Ten Commandments formerly resided. Move to the war with Lebanon and Syria. The expected war with Lebanon never materialized, although the Israeli military had the entire country spec'd out for missile neutralization under its momentum battle plan. The few missiles that were fired from Lebanon were minor salvos that did no damage, fired by Palestinian cohorts across the border. The looming question now is whether Hezbollah's chief, Sheikh Nasrallah, is still alive, or just hospitalized and deathly ill, or just down for a minor respiratory problem, or in hiding again because Saudi, Israeli, and American intelligence want to see him assassinated. Hezbollah's Deputy Secretary General, Naim Qassem, and the Lebanese daily Al Jumhuriyah both claim Nasrallah's medical condition is real but temporary. We shall see. Now the war with Iran. This historic military action is inching closer and closer to hot reality. The monumental clash could occur at any minute. What do we know as of now? We know that Iran openly funded and armed Hamas for last month's clash to test Israel's Iron Dome ability to take down a swarm attack, now planned to launch from Lebanon if Tehran orders it. At the same time, Iran is using every hour of its 24-hour day to accelerate its processing of weapons-grade nuclear materials with its faster IR-6 and IR-8 accelerators. Nuclear breakout is now off the table. It is now walkout. Iran openly admits it has upped its enrichment to 63%. That is the bottom level of actual weapons-grade uranium. Iran is doing this only to produce a weapon. There is no other reason. The warhead already perfected by Iran employs an R-265 shock generator hemisphere drilled with 5mm boreholes that are filled with PETN, that's pentaerythritol tetranitrate, an organic high explosive favored by terrorists. When triggered with precision, the PETN array can cause a massive synchronized implosion. This will fire an internal exploding bridge wire, which will in turn actuate an embedded neutron initiator to detonate the atomic reaction and the mushroom cloud. This sequence of devices has been assembled and tested long ago. I published the details in the last decade. Iran now has thousands of these exploding bridge wires. Their warhead fits nicely into the nose cone of a Shahab-3 missile with a guidance system to detonate at 500 meters above the ground, as was done in Hiroshima. So Iran just needs a few weeks to finalize the gunpowder part of the weapon. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, recently found traces of highly enriched nuclear material in a place where it should not be, and Iran won't answer. The clock is ticking. In the meantime, if US B-52s armed with bunker busters, which I originally revealed the existence of on September 22nd, 2009, if the US participates, or if a certain other thing I cannot talk about takes place, Iran may be planning to attack the American East Coast. In recent days, the Iranian Navy, under the independent control of the Republican Guard, dispatched allegedly to Venezuela a retrofitted oil tanker, now known as the naval vessel IRINS Makran, loaded topside with 7 fast attack missile boats. There's a copy of it right there. It is considered to be Iran's most advanced floating forward base. It is also fitted with drone swarms, and its massive hulk carries fighting forces. This vessel could strike our naval base in Norfolk, Virginia. The vessel is headed west now, sailing for the Caribbean. What will happen to it? Iran's key Venezuelan ally is Venezuelan oil minister Tarek al-Assami, a Lebanese Venezuelan wanted by Homeland Security as a Hezbollah agent and drug trafficking warlord. In the meantime, a strange confluence of really bad luck has befallen Iran in recent days. A few weeks ago, on May 16th, a key aluminum melting furnace on the outskirts of South Tehran exploded. Metal smelting is essential to warhead spheroidization. Cause of blast? Unknown. A week ago, May 23rd, the Sefahan Nargostar chemical complex, which makes explosives under the control of Iran's National Security Council, exploded in a huge fire. Of particular notice was part of its facility housing the works of the Iran Aircraft Manufacturing Company that makes drones. This was about just 30 miles northwest of Isfahan city. Cause unknown. May 25th, another major refinery, the Kangam Petrol Refining, explodes and burns. Cause unknown. 24 hours later, on May 26th, another petrochemical plant at Asalaya on Iran's Gulf Coast also explodes. Cause unknown. Yesterday, June 2nd, within hours of each other, more bad luck. Iran's biggest naval warfare vessel, the Karg, suffered a massive explosion so hot the hull melted, and after a day of irrepressible fire, the entire vessel sunk. Cause unknown. A few hours later, Tehran's massive main oil refinery, Tanguyan Works, also exploded, suffering massive damage. 4 hours ago, it suffered another explosion at or near its LPG facility. Again, cause unknown. Within recent days, both Bibi Netanyahu and the just seated incoming Mossad director, David Barnea, both made clear to President Biden and his national security and State Department leadership that Israel will not stand by and permit Iran to get a deliverable nuclear bomb. 2 days ago, at his installation ceremony, Mossad Chief Barnea openly stated, quote, "The Iran nuclear program will continue to be met with the full power of the long arm of the Mossad. We are very familiar with the different components of the nuclear program, and we are very familiar personally with the officials involved in it and also with the officials who direct them," close quote. Now for the war against the Jews. Switch geography for the new battlefront in this war. It's far beyond the Middle East. Rather, it's in your city. I speak now of the war against the Jews being engineered by Palestinians and their allies against ordinary Jews. Note, I did not say Zionists or even supporters of Israel. I said ordinary Jews. I just syndicated an article about the June 1st and 2nd, 1941 Arab Nazi massacre of Jews in Baghdad 80 years ago yesterday, and asked if it could happen again anywhere, including in the United States. Everyone knows we have seen a resurgence of Nazi-style pro-Palestinian, anti-Jewish violence on our streets. Mobs with Palestinian flags have been driving through Jewish neighborhoods and marching down the street calling out for Jews, humiliating them, threatening them, chasing them, trying to run them over, and beating them in gang assaults. In Hitler's day, they screamed that Jews should get out of Europe and go into Palestine. Today, they scream, get out of Palestine. But to where? More poignantly, the world asks why Jews didn't fight back against the Nazis in World War II. Yet today they ask, why did you dare fight back against the unremitting rocket terror launched by the new Nazis? History records many Farhoods by many names. In 1096 in Germany, in 1190 in York, and in the 1390s in Spain, these were just massacres. In the late 19th century of Russia, the assaults became known as pogroms. In Nazi Germany, they were called Aktions. In Eastern Europe, as the Einsatzgruppen led local crowds in grisly exterminations, we call it the Holocaust of bullets. There aren't enough trees producing paper, not enough pens dripping ink, not enough editors reading manuscripts, nor enough strength or sinew in my typing hands to list all the bloody atrocities that have befallen the Jews in that ubiquitous location known as, quote, here, there, and everywhere, close quote. Throughout history, only the shirts have changed color. Blood, however, retains its same crimson hue. Understand this, the Palestinian Arab bands hunting for Jews with impunity today are all basically cowards. They don't face people one-on-one. They rely on a mob of 10 or 20 people to surround a few weak-looking Jews, often elderly, often religious. They call out on loudspeakers as they drive through the streets to slaughter the Jewish men and rape the Jewish daughters, as was done a few weeks ago in London. Videos are piling up from Los Angeles, New York, London, and Germany, showing Jews being surrounded and beaten in the streets in scenes reminiscent of the run-up to the Holocaust, the Farhud, and so many other similar bloodlettings. This is because Arab militants and pro-Palestinian agitators still idealize Hitler. Hezbollah today gives a Nazi salute. This mentality has finally infected the mainstream. Major editors at the AP and the BBC, to name a few, have been caught with tweets proclaiming Hitler was right and other anti-Semitica. A few weeks ago, the Anti-Defamation League clocked 17,000 tweets in mid-May with permutations of the hashtag Hitler was right. A week later, it was 70,000 tweets. Now, who's counting? The pro-Palestinian mob has been emboldened by the summer protests and violence, which now seems so normative. They are encouraged by leftists and progressive Democrats in the squad, who seem to control their entire party. Even Chuck Schumer, Jerry Nadler, and Nancy Pelosi are quaking in fear of being primaried. Just as damaging are the misguided, completely uninformed, and self-destructive comments by ultra-liberal Jewish groups. The squad and the powerful Democratic minority continually issue anti-Semitic dog whistles via their tweets and comments. False statements that Israel is an apartheid state and utter falsity give green lights for pro-Palestinian gangsters to ramp up their street violence, ramp up their threats, and make Jews afraid to gather, stand for Israel, and even attend their own synagogues. The anti-Jewish agitation has gone from weekly incidents to hourly. I and many others now ask, quote, can the Farhud of 80 years ago actually occur today somewhere in Europe, the Middle East, or even in the USA? 2 hours ago, I received the top blog from the Times of Israel with this title: quote, America is over, I'm moving to Israel, close quote. The subhead reads as follows, quote, I don't know if another Holocaust is possible in the US, but after what I've seen lately, I do believe that at some point Jews will no longer be welcome here, close quote. You think she is alone? I'm hearing that from Jews high and low, mighty and meek, coast to coast. And while it seems to come from all across the social spectrum, behind many of the outrages, you will find Palestinian agitators and their allies. What began as campus hatred has infected newsrooms, political institutions, corporate boardrooms, high-tech monopolies, and society at large. Statements falsely accusing Israel of apartheid or other crimes without any balance or watered down language last month were endorsed by academic departments across the land. 130 gender studies departments did so, 10 gender studies centers, and 3 associations, including the National Women's Association. The National Women's Studies Association also released a separate statement affirming Palestinian solidarity as a feminist issue. Okay, let's see. Honor killing young women or disfiguring them with acid is not an issue. Hamas targeting kindergartens and clinics is not an issue. But Israel fighting back against the missiles, that is an issue. Other academic associations issuing statements include the American Anthropological Association and the Board of the Middle East Studies Association. This is the same tactic the Nazis employed, systematic exclusion and boycott. In Canada, Palestinian mobs are targeting Jewish homes looking for the mezuzahs and pasting fake eviction notices on the door. I have copies of the notices. This is what the Arab Nazis did in Baghdad and what ISIS did in Syria. Last week in Canton, Ohio, a coach forced a kosher Jewish boy to eat a full pork pizza in front of the team as punishment for being late. This type of cruelty was done in concentration camps. At Google, the head of diversity training, Kamal Bob, wrote that, quote, Jews have an insatiable appetite for war and insensitivity to the suffering of others, close quote. He has just been relieved of inclusion duties at Google. Employees at Facebook now demand to change the hate speech algorithms that allow Palestinians to stigmatize Jews. I have the cartoons against Jews that Facebook allows. They would be ruled hate speech in any rational mind. Then I read this. Quote, it pains me to say this, said Team Biden staffer Aaron Kayek, who is in charge of the Jewish Liaison Office for the Jewish community, quote, but if you fear for your life or physical safety, take off your kippah and hide your Jewish Star of David. Biden's office says that. I know many Jews are now afraid to wear the yarmulke openly. That's why I have decided to wear one whenever I go out in public, as often as I can, not because I am observant, but because I am defiant. Take this, Biden White House. Check out my kippah. I'm done. Let's go to the questions because we have plenty. Okay. Questions in abundance. Start here. From the Watch Party in the Villages. Is it time for Jewish defense leagues again? No, it's not time for Jewish defense leagues again. I could change my mind in a few weeks or a few months, maybe in a year. But for now, I say no, especially based on the history of these types of leagues that we've seen in the United States and elsewhere, which basically turn out to be a bunch of ruffians. What I would like to see is I'd like to see video documentation. I'd like to have these people observed, identified. I'd like to have a army of lawyers at the ready. I'd like them to be prosecuted. And then after the prosecution, they should be sued civilly for the crime that they committed. That's what I'm asking for now. Plus, of course, be aware of what is happening and understand that the leftist progressive Jews who think they're not going to be in the train disabuse your mind of that thought. You are being targeted at this very moment. From the Watch Party in Newton, Massachusetts. Love these guys. How is it that if the Democrats were the party of slavery, they have not been canceled? Well, that's that is a reasonable question. The Democrats were the party of the Trail of Tears that killed so many thousands of Indians. They were the party of eugenics, of slavery, of insurrection in the Civil War, of lynching, Jim Crow, segregation laws, obstructed and voted down and watered down any kind of voter rights bills for people of African descent. But apparently they're still in power, and I've yet to find one Democratic leader, state leader, county leader, national leader, caucus leader, who's willing to come on my show or give me a statement explaining that the Democratic Party does not have an anti-Semitic base within it. It's not the Democratic Party by itself. Remember that, not the full Democratic Party, but a powerful base within the party that is exerting its observable power over the entire party, and everybody knows it's the Squad and their allies. In fact, interesting story. I spoke to a guy in Florida, a really good guy, and I said to him, but your party was he was trying to talk about how progressive he was and how they stand for civil rights. I said, but your party was the party of lynching. He said, yeah, we don't lynch people anymore. That's great. I'm so happy to hear it. Okay. Watch Party in Chicago, my hometown. Yes, I missed Chicago. I missed the hot dogs and I missed the pizza. That's flat, not deep dish. What was the impact of the war on Israel in terms of the new Arab peace partners, such as the UAE, Morocco, and Sudan? Nothing. Nobody jumped in to side with the with Hamas. Not even the Palestinian Authority mainly did much of that. Egypt certainly didn't. The UAE certainly didn't. We had Rabbi Abadi on the show just previously, speaking directly from the UAE. Morocco did not suspend. Sudan did not suspend. Saudi Arabia did not derail its existing plans to normalize with Israel. So it is a full testament to the fact that it's possible, very possible, to have peace with Arab people and with Muslims. Remember, there are 11 or more Muslim majority nations in Asia who have full, vibrant, and cordial relations with Israel. There's India, which has many, many millions of Muslims. They all have good relations with Israel. So the answer is Chicago. The Abraham Accords held strong. Thomas in Miami. If Israel attacks Iran, when might that be? Thomas, listen to me. He who knows does not talk, and he who talks does not know. But just look at the facts. The explosions at the military-industrial complex behind the nuclear project in Iran have gone from weekly to daily, and from daily to almost hourly. So much is happening, and Iran has accelerated the threat by its intensified uranium enrichment. So it could be near, but remember, people have been saying it could be near for years. So take nothing from what I've said, except this: it could be near. Deb O in Cleveland. How do we fight back against the street violence? Well, I've kind of talked about that. I think we should go out in groups. As soon as you say that, as soon as you do that, you go out in groups, you've admitted you're not safe on the street. And that means Jews are not safe here. And go out in groups. If something occurs, have one guy fade back, start videoing the whole thing, and have your Stand With Us or any of the other important groups, the Brandeis Center on speed dial, call the cops, make a report, and then be sure to act in the civil courts. So these things don't just disappear. Thomas in Mannheim, Germany. Hello, guten Tag, Deutschland. Is it true Arabs are fond of calling their newborn babies with the name Hitler? I find this amazing being in Germany. Yes, that's very true. After World War II, the second most popular name for a newborn after Muhammad was in fact Hitler. The famous Field Marshal General Tantawi, he was the head military man in Egypt. His brother's name was Hitler Tantawi, and so there were Hitler love letter contests. They liked Hitler, and they idealized Hitler during World War II. There were famous posters. In heaven, your master is Allah. On earth, it is Adolf Hitler. And let's not forget, and you'll see this if you read this article that I wrote on the Farhud, Can It Happen Again? that the Mufti of Jerusalem was part of the extermination program and actually visited the concentration camps, did his utmost to get children sent to the concentration camps, and even recruited for 3 divisions of the Waffen-SS to fight in Europe. Okay. Stephen in New York. If the present course holds, when might we see a real bad situation for Jews in the US? Is it this year or next? Stephen in New York, you've asked questions before. Got a little piece of paper there, Stephen? Okay, spring 2026. That's all I'm saying. We'll talk about it later. Tamara in London. Does Iran have sleeper cells in the United States of America? Yes, of course they do. They have lots of sleeper cells. They have a student exchange. They're driving Ubers. They're chauffeuring. They're working in many capacities. This does not mean that when we see an Iranian, that we should think, oh my God, it's some kind of a terrorist or a sleeping cell member. The vast, overwhelming majority of Iranians that I know in this country were expelled or fled during the revolution. They do not support the current regime. They do not support the mullahs. They do support Israel. They'd like to get their country back. Here's a note from David in Chicago. Hey, David. David wants to know, where in Chicago were you from? Well, David, I don't know where you're from in Chicago, but I was born on the South Side, and my family moved around, and I ended up in Rogers Park. Never crossed into the suburbs, as I was always a city boy. And David Dubin just hits me with a chat note and says, West Ridge, West Rogers Park. So you might be the guy who stole my bicycle, because I'm from right that area. Anyway, good to know you're from the same place that I was, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, David, and give a note for everyone to see that the best hot dogs in Chicago were in Rogers Park at Fluky's. If that's not correct, you can send me a note. What does Palestine from the river to the sea mean? This is from Sarah in Cleveland. This is interesting. So many people are saying Palestine from the river to the sea. What does it mean? It means ethnic cleansing again. It means we expelled 850,000 Jews, penniless and stateless, from their homes where they'd been living for centuries, from the Arab and Muslim countries, from Morocco to Iraq in the 1950s, expelled 850,000, and now we want to do it again. And people are agreeing with this, and they're repeating this. It's being said openly. Palestine from the river to the sea means no two-state existence, no tolerance for Jews. The memos and cartoons and tweets from Arab and Iranian leaders telling Jews to buy homes now in Poland and Eastern Europe accentuate what they have in mind, which is another farhood. Interestingly enough, the 850,000 Jews from Arab countries who were expelled, penniless, where the earrings were torn from their ears and the bracelets were torn from their wrists. Those guys constitute now half of the Israeli population, giving a huge lie to the idea that the Jews of Israel are from Brooklyn or Belgium or Belarus. They're from the Arab countries. They're from across the bridge. They're from Egypt. They're from Lebanon. They're from Syria. They're from Iraq. They're from North Africa. And it's just part of our new misinformation age. Okay, here's another question, QA. This is from Rabbi Joel. I'm not sure where you're from. Do you truly believe that Iran is a threat to the U.S. East Coast? You've got 3 question marks and 1 exclamation mark. Well, first of all, the Iran has constantly threatened the United States. 2, Iran is developing intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching not only Europe and our installations in the Middle East and Europe and Africa, but also the East Coast. They've said so repeatedly. Now you have to ask, do I think that they can get away with it? No, not if we're looking, but I'm talking about their intentions. Why would the Iranians send their biggest forward base vessel to Venezuela, to the Caribbean, armed, and there are actually 2 such vessels. I showed you a picture of one, armed with swift boats and missile launchers to Venezuela. So this we have to understand. Let's see, we have another question here. I hope that answers it, Rabbi Joel, and let us know where you're a rabbi from. Norm in Miami, that's another guy in Miami. Is there hope for peace? I don't think there's hope for peace if one side is absolutely convinced that the other side must disappear. That does not sound like coexistence. Nor do I think there's hope for peace. So I was referring to Hamas and their charter. Nor is there hope for peace even when the king-making Arab Party in Israel has in its charter that Israel must disappear as a Jewish state. Nor do I think there's hope for peace when the signatory of the Oslo Accords was given literally with land swaps 102% of the land in question, violates every agreement, and won't take the time to have a meeting and discuss coexistence. But there is hope for peace from the outside in, not from the inside out. There's hope for peace because Egypt and Jordan have made peace. It's a cold peace, I grant you that. But even the coldest peace is better than the coolest war. There is a budding possibility of peace in Lebanon, a budding possibility in Syria, believe it or not. a vibrant peace with the Gulf states, even during the height of all of this 11-day war with Gaza, with all these missiles going back and forth. The Gulf states continued expanding their peace arrangements with Israel, signing new agreements, getting involved in new bilateral billion-dollar investment packages, and making it that much more real that true peace will come to these two peoples. That it's something to observe. The same from Sudan, the same from Morocco. And even though Saudi Arabia issued a couple of statements, the fact of the matter is that Saudi Arabia did nothing. There was no Arab League emergency session, did nothing to pressure Israel. In fact, its intelligence units were figuring out how they could assassinate Nasrallah and dissuade him from launching a regional war. Okay, I think that's about it. We're gonna stop early today instead of going late, and I'm gonna say we're out of time. I'll see everybody here next week at 3 p.m. Eastern. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the US or any Amazon platform in 190 countries across this planet, where you can find any of my 200 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and the Farhud. Get passwords and access alerts to participate live in future shows at theedwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced and produced version of this show and prior episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channel at The Edwin Black Show, and click that notification button. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on Twitter and Facebook. I am zooming out.